Don't you think a better use of our time is just to forgive those people? So then that way you don't have to do this at all. When all of you started your business, you would have killed somebody to be in the position that you're in now. You're still not happy. The human being is not born unhappy because we are under the presupposition that work needs to be hard.
Why do people self-sabotage themselves when everything is going so good?
Because there is a deeper belief there that I am not worthy of it.
What is up, Self-Aware Leader crew? It's Jason Rigby, and today I'm diving deep with Max Stevens. He's the coach elite. This guy's done elite CEOs, Hollywood heavyweights, and he's going to shatter the illusions of what we think self-awareness is, what leadership is, and he's got a secret about success that's going to flip everything you know. And he's got a book coming out. Pre-sales will be coming up. It's What the Fuck Do You Really Want? A no-nonsense guide to finding your purpose. Max, thanks for being on the podcast today.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Jake. Looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, that's awesome. Max, in your website, and I know you're talking about this in your book, you say success isn't the goal, it's a strategy. So what's the one question that high performers avoid asking themselves that keeps them stuck chasing, a lot of times the wrong things?
Yeah. So in order for us to begin answering that question, whenever we're sort of setting out on a journey to success, the thing that I argue for is we want to make sure that we have firm ground, our feet firmly on the ground to begin this journey. Right. And so I can't tell you, Jace, how many leaders have come to me and they'll say, would really love to work with you to double the size of the revenue in the business. Right. As an example. And the first question that shows up for me is, okay, well, why do you want that? Like, you could have brought anything to the session. You could have brought anything to me today, but this is the thing that showed up for you. Why did you want that? And they might say something in the neighborhood of, so I can prove to all of those people who said that I can't do it, that I can. And my next question is, well, don't you think a better use of our time is just to forgive those people? So then that way you don't have to do this at all.
Oh, that's so good. Yes.
And so the thing that sort of shows up for me is I use the word axiomatic. Axiomatic basically just means like the presuppositions that we build our journey on, right? In my view, with high performers, oftentimes very weak, and then they wonder why they're struggling with motivation, why they need accountability, why they need these external structures of accountability, which I think is a huge problem within the coaching industry, because they never actually go and look at the thing that is driving their journey to so-called success in the first place. And then when they get there, and we've all heard this story 100 times, of like, oh, I thought it would make me happy, and then I got it, and it didn't make me happy. And it's like, well, yeah, because the by definition, the very nature of your journey was poorly grounded.
That's so good. Max, this is something you touched on, you just said, and I think it's so important. And I've shared this with my listeners, but for me, I operated at a high level off of like fake fuel or like Red Bull or cheap fuel kind of, and I'm never good enough, from like as a kid being raised in, a really religious home where everything is always bad and you're sinning and you got to ask forgiveness constantly and you're just never good enough. There's never a point to where, but it was good fuel in the sense it got me to be successful. But once I got successful, and this is a question I want to ask you, you achieve all these things and then you still feel empty. What's that hidden cost of ambition that no one really talks about, and feeling that way?
Yeah, good question. So I have a similar sort of story to you in that my story is very similar to that of most high performers, which is born of some sort of psychosomatic trauma or pain, right? And so you grew up in a religious home, I grew up in a drug addicted home, so I'm very familiar with not feeling good enough, so to speak. So like the internal belief that sort of got internalized for me early on in my life was like, if my dad had really loved me, he would have been able to get healthy and clean, and he would have been able to go on runs, because love that he would have for me, should have been enough to get him healthy. And because he wasn't able to do that, that must mean that I'm not lovable. Right. And so in terms of this hidden cost of ambition, the problem is for most high performers is that they are trying to achieve an external outcome to fix an internal problem. By definition, that can't happen, and so it can be useful in some ways, because if we go down that dead end eventually, well, I would argue most high performers actually never see it, but it can be useful to go down that dead end and actually see that it doesn't make me happy, because then that gets me interested in, okay, well, if that didn't work, then what would work? And it gets me more interested in my internal experience, etc. But in terms of the hidden cost, that's it, because it's a trap. They get caught in a trap because they say, yeah, but Max, you don't understand. that's only just because I haven't achieved this, and whatever this
Mhm.
is, but the thing that I would say is, well, you're already, and I said this I ran like a digital seminar for a bunch of CEOs. I ran it for like 45 CEOs a few weeks ago. And I said, when all of you started your business, you would have killed somebody to be in the position that you're in now.
Mhm.
You're still not happy.
Mhm.
And I said, so you guys are CEOs. So one of the sort of core skills that you guys are all good at, better than me at, is pattern recognition, right? And so the idea is like, are we seeing this pattern here? It's like you said it would be here, and then it's not. You said it would be here, and then it's not. And now 45 of you are all turning to me going, yeah, but Max, you don't understand. It's just because I haven't gotten here. And I go like, you're not seeing the pattern here, right? And so by way of hitting costs of ambition, that one is a tremendous time waster.
No, I get it, and I know you talked to them about this, but I want you to talk to my audience because I think it's so important. If most of us have this issue, it's like I made 1,000,000. No, I need to make 5. Well, 5 is the perfect number. Oh, well, 5's not good. 20 is where you need to be at. And then, oh, well, I could do an IPO. What that emptiness that's inside of us, we know where it comes from. I mean, and you can talk about that too, and you just did. But like how do you break that pattern?
Great question. Great questions. Okay, so this is the thing. We really have to take a step back here to effectively answer this question. So I'll lead up to the answer, right? So the thing to understand is that the human being is an animal, and like any other animal, it has intrinsic needs, right? So like this is something I talk a little bit about in the book. Like dogs have different personalities. They might have different energy levels or different temperaments, etc. But they're all dogs. And dogs have intrinsic
Mhm.
needs. Dogs need play, they need affection, they need food, they need etc. And if you deny any of dog any of these needs, the dog will suffer. Doesn't matter temperament, doesn't matter anything. And the human animal is the same. And so in that we have intrinsic needs as well. And our intrinsic needs are connection, contribution, community, feeling connected to something bigger than ourselves, etc. Right? And so if you deny any human being these fundamental, we might almost call them like spiritual needs, we suffer. And the problem, and in terms of how we break that, so okay, let's take a step back even further. So for tens anyway, this is argued whether it's tens or hundreds of thousands, but let's just go on the shorter side by way of argument. So for tens of thousands of years, our ancestors lived in tribes in the forest.
Mhm.
So my success, quote unquote, my success was predicated upon the contribution that I made to said tribe. Did you go and get the berries? Did you go and hunt the animal? Did you go and catch the fish, etc. Right? And if I did that and I came home and I shared it with the tribe, I was a success. Right? Now the problem, right? So that is our evolutionary biology. Now what we have is we have designed like this individualistic culture that you and I live in the West. This is like a brand new phenomenon. This is not how we lived, quote unquote, for tens of thousands of years. Right? It's a new idea. And so what's happened is that we are now living lives that are out of alignment with our own evolutionary biology, right? Like now our tribe, we don't really have a tribe. Most of us don't even know our neighbors' names. So we live these lives of like isolation. And I'm out for me and you're out for you. And if I can help you, Jace, I will a little bit. But by and large, you're out for you and I'm out for me. So in terms of how we break that pattern, we try and what the place that we need to get to is to recognize, this is why I talk about success as a strategy, not the goal, is that success is a byproduct of making a meaningful contribution to your tribe. But now today, your tribe isn't like your little corner of the forest. Your tribe is now the world. You're over in the US, I'm assuming. I'm here in Sydney, Australia, and we can make a meaningful contribution to one another, right? In this conversation. And
Right.
so the way that we do that is we look out at the world and we ask ourselves, like, what are my gifts? Who can I serve? And where should I start? And if your journey is built on those axiomatic assumptions that you are out on a mission trying to make the world better, then success comes as a byproduct of doing so.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, but it's kind of obviously we're going against tens of thousands of years of evolutionary psychology, in our brain. And now, are you saying, because I want to get this, are you saying that we, in our loneliness, whatever you want to call it, our separateness, that we are essentially replacing go get the berries, go get the fish with go get the $1,000,000, go get the $5,000,000, and then we repeat and rinse and do that every day?
No, no. So great question. So no. So what I'm saying is that it's no longer about me contributing to my tribe. It's what can I get from me.
Okay. Yes. 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 I
That
guess that. Yeah.
that's the fundamental shift that we've gone through collectively as a culture is I'm out for me and you're out for you. And you and I are not in the same, like, we're polite to each other, but by and large we are not in the same tribe. Right. And so this is the problem that we run into is that, living I said this to these CEOs the other day. Like I said, living a life for you, like, is a life of misery. It is absolute
Mhm.
misery. Like, there is no difference psychologically speaking, between like the same centers of our brain that get activated when we are feeling symptoms of depression, right? Or symptoms of anxiety. And the same are exactly the same centers of the brain that light up when we think about ourselves. So
Wow.
what happens is, like this is like the foundational question. It's like it's a classic question of like, if you achieve success but you have no one else to share it with, like, what's it worth? And everyone goes like, oh, not much, but whereas
Mhm.
say, well, if you achieve success but you have all these people to spoil and share it with, etc., what's it worth? And people go, oh, it's the best feeling in the world. And it's like, well, yeah, that's right. That's your biology. Like, that's your
Mhm.
nature, like, shining through. Like, notice that whenever I ask anybody and they go, oh, like, I just really, just doing this for me and having no one else to share it with, it wouldn't really mean much. And it's like, well, like, the reason why is because that's not how we're designed. Like, the human animal is a communal creature. Like, we don't live like far away from each other. We live in these like herds, in these tribes, in these communities, right? And so we have designed lives that are basically predicated upon isolation. We live in a highly individualistic culture where the individual is heralded over the collective, and it's all about what I want. And it gets us into questions around like, well, Max, who are you to really say, shouldn't you just respect my individuality, man, and all that sort of stuff. But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
look, again, like, the reality is, like, if I, in a hypothetical world where I could talk to dogs and the dogs would say, well, Max, you need to respect my individuality. It's like, yeah, I do, and I'm happy to do that. But you have to understand, like, that you are a dog, and you have dog needs, and the human animal is a human, and obviously an animal, and it has its own needs.
I think a lot of business leaders, the other opposite of this, and I want you to talk about this because it's still toxic. And I had this for a long time is like, well, fuck me. This is for my family. This is for, I'm gonna leave a legacy. I'm gonna leave, I'm gonna work really hard. And then when I die, they may not see me much, but when I die, I'm gonna give them, all that they could take it and
Yeah.
do what they want with it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like this self-sacrificial thing. What do you say on that, on the opposite spectrum of that?
So I can't tell you how many times I have asked leaders, how come you work so hard? And they say that answer. They say, I'm providing for my family. And I say, okay, let's stop the coaching session right now. Let's stop it right now. I say, go get your phone. And they'll walk on, go grab their phone, and they'll jump back on Zoom. And I say, okay, you've got your phone. And I go, just by way of example, let's say I'm working with a man in this case. And I say, call your wife, right? And get her on speakerphone during the call. And I get them to do that. And then I say, ask her how you could be a better husband, how you could be a better dad, right? And ask her really what she wants from you. And what do you think? What do you think the loved ones of? What do you think loved ones will often say? We want more what?
Time with you. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And I say, okay, cool. So you can hang up that call. Now call your kids and ask them again. Ask them the same question, and they get them on the phone, and then they say, yeah, we want more time with dad. And then I get them to hang up the phone, and I go, okay, so let's just be clear about this. You're not doing it for them, because if you actually listen to them, that's actually not what they want. That's actually,
Oh, that's so good.
that's
Right.
actually not what they want from you, right? So now that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, right? But let's at least be honest with each other and say that you're not doing this for it. You're doing this for you. You're doing this to live out an idea of what you think it means to be a good member of that family. But if you actually listen to said family, that's actually not what they want from you.
That's so good, Max. That hits me deep too. I know you work with these, athletes, Hollywood elite CEOs. What's the one thing do you think going along with this, red thread that we're cutting through? What's the one thing you think that's secretly holding them back from like truly mastering who they are?
Forgiveness or a lack thereof. Yeah.
Say, explain that.
Yeah. So the high performer's journey, by and large, is often born of some sort of painful experience, right? So at some stage in a high performer's life, they are. It's normally one or two things. Well, these are certainly the patterns that I notice in my clients. It's normally one or two things. So number one is that they are made to feel insignificant in some way, right? And they live in reaction to that pain, which is why they dive very deeply into their work, why their output is extraordinary, etc. It's because if you leave them alone, like if you lock them in a room by themselves, They would fucking hate it. And so what they do is they basically they're trying to disconfirm a feeling, right? By way of external achievement. Brings us back to our earlier discussion point. So by way of forgiveness, the reason why this holds them back, is basically because when they don't forgive, they are living out a pattern that they are not in control of. I grew up in a drug addicted household, right? And again, you have a sort of separate podcast on addiction, right? Like the studies of children of addicts basically go one of two ways. They are made to feel that they are unloved, and they will do one of two things. They'll go through the rest of their life to seek out, to basically seek out a confirmation of that belief. So they won't amount to much. They won't achieve very much, because they are wanting to confirm this belief for themselves. Look how fucked my life was. Or they'll say, fuck you, yes, I am lovable. And they'll basically be trying to disconfirm this feeling. Right. And so I was just lucky. The truth is, I was just lucky that I fell into the second category. That wasn't because I was so brilliant or I was so clever or I was whatever, or I was so ambitious even. It was just by way of luck. And this is the thing with the high performers journey, is that because it is born of pain, and they are acting out this pattern, because they never actually go back and address said wound that caused it in the first place. It leads to sort of like blind spots in their experience, and they'll lie to themselves. They'll often lie to themselves. Going back to our conversation about family, they'll lie to themselves and say oh, well, I'm doing this for them, but the thing is they can't have, they're very bad at taking holidays. They're very bad at relaxing. They're very bad at being present, and it's like, well, if you're doing this for them, it's the whole actions speak louder than words, or like my coach says to me, see where people spend their time and you'll see what's important to them. And so the piece around forgiveness is if you can actually go back and heal, said wound, right? Then not only is your output more effective, but now you've actually got your feet sort of firmly on the ground. And you can actually make a decision about what you want. In the past, like prior to doing so, you're basically living out a pattern that you don't have control over. It's like the Pinocchio phenomenon where you're getting pulled by the strings.
So when you're talking about forgiveness, if you don't mind, I think I can judge your personality with, what you're talking about. Did you have to go through that process with your parents?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Like that's what got me so interested in the field in the first place. Like I had that experience where I wasn't made to feel. It got internalized. That feeling got internalized of not being lovable, and that I was out on this journey to success. I actually went when I was 18 years old. I went to India, right? And I was studying like meditation in the slums of India. Please forgive me, listeners, if you heard me tell a story before. But I was walking through the slums, and there was a guy sitting on the side of the road in like a meditative position, clearly homeless, clearly malnourished, and he was crying. And I said to him, "Oh, listen, sir, I can't speak the language. I just wanted to check if you're okay." And he looked up at me and he said, "Oh, no, I'm perfectly fine." I said, "Oh, wow, you speak like perfect English," because the area of India that I was in, like I was probably the only white person for miles. And I said, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just checking. Like, are you okay?" And he said, "Oh, no. These are happy tears." And I said, "Oh, that's great." I said, "Did you get good news or, and he said, "No, not at all." And I said, "So why are you so happy? Why are you crying?" And he said, "Because I am." And that never left me, like that
Mm,
always stayed with me when I was young, because I thought, well, he's, what would you say? He's happier than I'll ever be, and I have more
mhm,
than he'll ever have, even at 18,
mhm.
right? Even just by way of where I was born, like, and where I grew up and all that sort of stuff. And I said, he's happier than I'll ever be. And that never left me, because it got me curious. And I said, like, okay, so clearly if there can be such a mismatch between our internal experience and our environment, by way of the fact that he was homeless, had no food, etc., and was so happy, right? Then by definition, then the opposite must also exist, where I could achieve X, Y, Z and still be deeply unhappy. So the opposite must also be true. And that got me very curious about the whole axiomat, all of the axiomatic assumptions that I was making about what I needed to do to live out what I felt a meaningful life was.
So in that moment, you see that guy's crying, it's happy tears, which, a lot of leaders probably can't remember the last time they had that. Maybe when their child was born or something. Maybe when they got married, it's like a huge event. I've talked to a lot of leaders and, and I've experienced this in my own life too. There's this whole thing of I'm not really happy, but I like it when I'm working because I'm so motivated to do, just work, work, work. but I don't know what happiness is. I had one of my friends, he's like, "Dude, I went on a vacation and I was just kind of sitting there." And I was reminded of, I don't know if you've seen the new White Lotus or not TV show.
No, forgive me. Sorry.
No, yeah, it's on HBO. It's amazing. It's like top show right now. But there's a businessman in there. Basically, he's in Thailand, Four Seasons, most beautiful, and he just it's just work, 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 cell phone, cell phone, cell phone. Whenever you see, like, are you equating happiness with forgiveness, or is that like another step? Like the I am, like he said, I am. I'm just I am. That's just who I am, and that's a very spiritual statement. What does that mean, like forgiveness, happiness? Like, I think the language that you're speaking right now, leaders are like, "What the fuck?"
Well, if you look at, like, for example, if you look at the definition of the word peace, like
Mhm,
peace is defined as an absence of conflict. So the path to happiness is a path of resolution. In other words, the human being is not born unhappy. What happens is we have these experiences through our process of socialization that stay with us and quote unquote form our personality. That form our personality. But by way of, like, we can get into that a little bit more in terms of how to actually achieve said happiness. But so, like, the three things that I talk about in the book in terms of starting the journey. So there's three things that we need. So number one is that we need to forgive people in the past, because if we're going to start a new journey here, like, we have to make sure that we're not living out old assumptions. So that's the first thing. And some people will say, well, I don't really have anyone to forgive. I'm pretty cool with everybody. And I say, well, you haven't looked very deeply if that's the case.
mhm,
Because you would be shocked just how many people you have to forgive and how much you're hanging on to.
mhm,
That's the first thing. The second thing, right? The second thing is that it is a deep awareness of one's own mortality. So the reality is, Jace, like, in spite of how successful you and I might become, or the impact that we are going to have on the world, etc., is that you and I will be forgotten. Like, yes or yes. It's
mhm,
just a matter of how long, right? And the reason why is because that is the great leveler, because often we get into conversations around, like, well, I've got this safe career and this safe this and safe that. And I say, safe schmafe, mate. Like, you're going to die. Like, yes or yes. So there is no, like, safe road, because all roads end up in the same place. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is as we move into this journey, we need, like, radical levels of honesty. Right. So, like, even when like, it's like one of the first things I say on my website, is like, you are not chasing success. You are chasing completeness. And they are not the same thing. They are not the same thing. Let's just be very clear about that. So they're the sort of three pillars that we can build our work on. So that then opens up a really interesting conversational point, which we can go into if it's okay with you, which is like, okay, fine. Let's say I'm on board with stuff so far. How do I actually achieve said happiness? Right. If we go through our evolutionary biology, happiness is equated with contribution to a tribe, right? That is how we are wired. Yes or yes. Like, it doesn't matter what part of the world you're from, right? And so if that is then the case, this is why all those cliche personal development tropes around, like, find how you want to give to the world and all that sort of nonsense. Like, that in spite of it often being branded and packaged in a complete nonsense way, is actually well grounded. And so the question is, okay, one of the most counterintuitive things about life is, if you want a better life, stop thinking about you. So when you look out at the world, what breaks your heart? Like, what really moves you? And like, you're a great example of this, Jace. It's like when you look out at the world, the thing that you see is people who are in leadership positions, who don't have the self-awareness enough, who don't have enough self-awareness, I should say, to actually be in said positions, right? And then cause poor ripple effects throughout organizations, by way as the
mhm,
fact that they are not self-aware. And for you, when you look out at the world and you see that, it obviously compels you or moves you enough to do something about it, by way of spreading awareness about this, by way of this podcast, etc., etc. Right? So that's the first thing, is we have to look out at the world and ask ourselves, like, what moves me? Because the things that move you aren't necessarily the things that are going to move me or any of your listeners, right? So, like, it's funny, like, I was having this conversation with somebody the other day, and they said, "So can you explain to me, like, what you do?" And I started to explain it to them, and they surmised it and basically said, "So you just basically sit around on Zoom and listen to people's problems all day?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I guess." And I said, I could never do that, and whereas for me, like, there's no greater honor. It's like, let me help you in a way that is most meaningful to you, right? Like, for me,
mhm,
that's like, there's no bigger honor than that, right? So, but that doesn't have to be that way for your listeners. So when you look out at the world, like what moves you, right? So it's a three-pronged equation. I touched on it before, but maybe we can go a little bit further deeper into it now. So the first thing is that we have to look when you look out at the world, right? We want to work out, who do I want to serve in the world? So what problem do I want to solve? How do I want to make the world a better place? Right? Let's start there. Like, so if the world was better because I was in it, like what would I hope that would manifest into? Right? So that's the first part. The second part is that we turn back on ourselves and we ask ourselves, what are our gifts? So what are the things that come really naturally to me? And this is something else I talk a lot about in the book, which is a fundamental misunderstanding of the word, is like your gifts are not for you. We think of like gifts as like, oh, this is something that God or the universe or whatever has bestowed upon me that just comes really easy for me. That's rubbish. Your gifts are supposed to be given away. By definition, they are not gifts if you are not giving them away.
Yes.
They are possessions. And so one of the exercises I have people do in the clients do, and I write about it in the book, is they go and ask 10 people that you respect, what your gifts are. And the reason why I have people do that is often because they come really easily to us and they put us in flow state experiences, is that we dismiss them because we are under the presupposition that work needs to be hard and we need to have that grindy feeling and hustle and all that rubbish. So, okay, so we work out what moves me in the world, then we work out my gifts. And then the question becomes, okay, how is it that my gifts can serve these people, whoever I find when I look out at the world? And that if we have forgiven the people, if we are awareness of our own mortality, and if we are radically honest, that gives us the best possible chance at setting out on the journey correctly. And so if we can start to do that, and if we are powerful in doing so, success just comes as a byproduct of doing that. And because you are in alignment with your own intrinsic nature, and you are in alignment with your own gifts, and you're also creating alignment with who it is that you're wanting to serve, happiness also by definition comes as a byproduct. But one of the problems that we have in Western culture is we think of like happiness as like sitting under a tree on the beach with a margarita without a care in the world. But the thing is, like, the reality of that vision is like the first 3 days, sure, it would be nice. 3 weeks in, you would be restless, as 3 months in, and 3 months in, you would be absolutely miserable and probably an alcoholic. Right. So the idea that we are built for comfort is nonsense. You're built for adventure. You are built for living on your edge. You're built for like maximal challenge. That's what the human animal is built for. We are not built for comfort. Again, look at our evolutionary biology and as you would say, our psychology as well. You're not built for comfort. It's like that. That's why, I don't know if you've had that experience where you go on a holiday and the first like 3 days, it's like, oh, this is so great because you're coming out of, all of that. And then by the end of the holiday, you feel restless,
Hmm.
and so yeah, that's right. You're not built for that. And so that then gives us the best possible chance, of achieving said happiness. Because the reality is, like, anything that we achieve at the end of our lives, like, we can't take with us, right? So like everything that I amass for me, like, I can't take with me. So the only question that's really going to matter at the end of my life is, as I look back at the world that I'm preparing to leave, the only question that I'm really going to be asking myself is, or is the world better because I was in it? Yes or no?
Mm.
And if you've done all those things, right, then you should be able to look back at the end of your life and go, undoubtedly, yes, it was. And I did it in a way that was meaningful to me. And that, in my view, is the pathway to peace.
That's amazing. That was like, I know it was quick, but I want everybody to rewind and listen to that multiple times because you just unlocked the key. I mean, just like that within 5 minutes. You said something where you talked about basically the coaching industry is broken.
Yeah.
These gurus and all that. Why do we keep falling as leaders? Why do we keep falling for quick fixes?
Okay. Okay. Great question. So there's a few reasons, certainly from my perspective, why the coaching industry is broken. So number one is like the barrier to entry is basically zero, right? So anybody can basically call themselves a coach. And because of that, one of the problems with the industry is it invites people who are basically ex-corporates and ex-athletes who have been burnt out by their own careers, who are attempting to build a lifestyle business for themselves.
Hmm.
That's often what actually bursts people into that industry, is that someone who is in corporate or someone who is an athlete, right, who's at the end of that tenure, who now is in this question of like, okay, how do I win back more time for myself? And so the way that their business models are sort of set up is they'll say, Max, I'll meet you, or Jace, I'll meet with you sort of twice a quarter, and it's going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars for 4 hours of my time every year, right? And the reason why they do that, by and large, is because they are attempting to build a business for them. They are not really out for your best interest. I'm not saying that there aren't good people in the industry, right? But this is just by and large the overarching pattern. Right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is that because they've been in corporate careers for a long time, they haven't necessarily done a lot of deep thinking about life. They have this sort of skills, knowledge, and experience, whether it's like negotiation or, management or, like something like that, which also poses a lot of problems because we get into questions about like, right, so you've got burnt out in your own career and you're going to tell me how to do mine, so that dynamic also becomes a problem. But suffice to say, right? Suffice to say that so they have these skills, knowledge, and experience, but they're not aware of like human epistemology, deep levels of psychology, human meaning making, etc. Like basically what they're interested in is like how to achieve more productivity, right? That's by and large like what most coaches are up for. Which brings us into in my view, one of the most foundational problems with coaching is coaches are by and large accountability buddies. And the problem with creating external structures of accountability around us, right, is it misses the point. So, for example, right, I can't tell you how many leaders I've worked with who have worked with coaches in the past. And they say, Max, I really want to work with you. I just need someone to hold me accountable. And I say, well, maybe the conversation that we should be having is why is it that you feel like you need someone to hold you accountable in the first place? Because if we answer that question, then you don't need me at all, you know?
That's so good.
Yeah, whereas what most coaches will do is they'll actually play into that and they'll say, fine,
Mhm.
text me every day, everything that you achieve. We'll get a checklist and a shared Google Doc that we'll work on together, et cetera, et cetera. But the problem when we do that is it creates a dependency on that external structure. So as soon as the coach disappears, right, all of that
Mhm.
quote unquote accountability or motivation disappears along with it. And like then no wonder the industry has a bad name because all of the gains are
Mhm.
short lived, right? And finally, just around that, like the other thing that by and large becomes a problem is that particularly within our respective industries, Jace, like people use a lot of what I call like bundled language. So what I mean by bundled
Mhm.
language is they'll say, "I'll help you actualize your potential. I'll help you discover your authentic self." You know, but that means nothing. Like it means absolutely nothing. When you actually get down to what that actually means, like you press somebody on that. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? There's nothing there. Like, what do you mean? Like, who gets to decide what is authentic? Who gets to decide when something is actualized? Who gets to decide what is my potential? Because potential is an ever receding thing, as we've sort of talked about. Who gets to decide when we have discovered it, et cetera, et cetera. So like we get into all of these like bundled terms that sound good on paper, but actually don't really mean anything. And that's why I come back to like I write a lot about it in this book. Like, if you are out there like using your gifts to serve people powerfully, that moves you in the world, and you are creating positive like ripples in the world. By ripples, I mean like, for example, Jace, when we have a positive interaction with someone, it normally ripples to about three people outside of that person. So if you and I have
Mhm.
great conversation, I then go and have a conversation with my fiance who says, "Hey, how did it go?" And I said, "Oh, it was amazing, whatever." That and ripples to her, like that positivity ripples to her, and it
Mhm.
ripples to about one more person. So it's normally about three people aside. So if you're creating powerful ripples in the world, helping to make a meaningful difference in the world with the gifts that you have been given, right? That's actually what actualizing your potential, looks like. But a lot of coaches don't understand that, and so they create these external structures of accountability by way of creating a dependency on them so they can build a lifestyle business for themselves. And in my view, like it's fucking reprehensible. I think it's terrible.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. It's almost like trying to put steroids in an athlete, it's kind of the same thing. It's just cheap fix. It's not long term. It's not gonna work. With this accountability thing that you talked about, I want to get your perspective on this. One thing that I learned on accountability as far as trying to be self-aware is that I would want to self-sabotage myself. Things would be going too good and I couldn't handle that. So I had to bring myself back down, and so I would use accountability partners in hopes that I wouldn't self-sabotage myself. I don't know if that makes sense. When I became self-aware enough, why do you think leaders will, sleep with their secretary, steal money from, an organization? I mean, the list goes on and on. We can see in politics and everything else that's going on. Why do people self-sabotage themselves when everything is going so good?
Because there is a deeper belief there that I am not worthy of it. And so we act out all sorts of patterns that we can't articulate, but it's funny it's funny, like when I was, because I grew up like playing, as an example, right? Just by way of example, I grew up playing like quite high level, I would say national level, but not above level tennis when I was young, right? Like, and because I had this thing around my dad, right? When I would go on the court and I would be winning,
Mhm.
my body would start to have like traumatic responses on the court.
Mm.
I would start shaking. I would start feeling sick, etc. And if I let the other player come back and beat me, my body would flood with relief.
Mm.
Like, how fucked up is that? You know? Like,
Yeah, no, no, no,
you know?
that's a lot of leaders have that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I know. And that's what I mean. Like, that's what I mean. It's a deeper sort of challenge, but it's certainly in my view, the patterns that I sort of observe is it is often a feeling of feeling undeserving. And so they're identified very deeply with the struggle of getting out of, whatever. But when you actually have an opportunity to get out of it, often they will find a seemingly external reason why it happened. I'm reminded of there's this great it's actually a horror film. It's called Smile. I don't know if any of your viewers have seen this,
Mhm.
but it's basically like it's quite clever in that it's basically like a metaphor for how trauma gets passed along. Is like the idea that hurt people, as in people who are hurt, will hurt people, right? And so this demon like moves from person to person as trauma gets passed along. And there's this like wonderful scene. It's very clever. There's this wonderful scene at the end of the film where like the main character, don't know her name, but it doesn't matter. The main character, she like finally faces her trauma, and it's by way of this like terribly frightening. It's quite a scary movie. This terribly frightening demon, that comes like face to face with it, and they're in this. Her and this demon are like inside this sort of wooden shack out in the forest somewhere, and she runs outside to escape this demon. And there's the guy who like loves her the whole time in the movie is outside. I think he's a cop, and like he's outside standing by his police car, and he goes, "It's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, calm down." And he looks at her, and he holds her, and he looks at her and he holds her and he says like, "It's okay, like you're safe now, like I love you and I'll look after you." And she screams and runs back into the house to see the trauma. Like, and
Mm.
in my view, it's just like it's perfect. It's like a perfect
Mhm.
approximation of what you're sharing. She has this opportunity, to like get free of it, but instead she runs back into the house to go and see it again. And I just think that's a perfect encapsulation of what you're sharing.
Yeah, no, I love that. I found a lot with addiction is the same way. I never had, like any drug or alcohol addiction. I had a food addiction and I've lost like 60 pounds. But I realized just real fast, my listeners have heard this before, but I realized when my parents would argue, because they argued a lot when I was little. They didn't have that good of a marriage, and then there was religion entrapped. My comfort was food. And when my parents would make up, they would take us all to we were poor, so the big place to go was like Burger King or McDonald's. It was like a big thing to get, to go to a fast food place. So I associated all that as a child with, I'm feeling shitty, grab something, I'll eat 4 Big Macs, I'll eat 8 Krispy Kreme donuts. I could just pound food down. And as I started to become successful, it became worse because I could be able to afford nicer food
Yeah.
and more sweets. And, I could go in and buy a whole dozen of donuts, to eat them really fast. And one of these things that I learned was with that, like you said, with the tennis, when I'm sitting there after I eat those donuts and I'm sitting in my car, I'm like, you piece of shit. What the fuck? I like my addiction or whatever you want to call it. That demon, we'll use your reference, that demon liked to just keep me in that shack in the woods and it always would talk to me and tell me what a piece of shit I was, if that makes sense. And I don't know if you experienced that with your life, with your parents and the trauma that you went through, but as leaders, I talk to leaders and they say, well, that motivates me. I love it. Like the David Goggins, like you're a piece of shit. How does that play out? How can we quiet that noise in our head?
Well, I have a lot of views around David Goggins. I hope I get to talk to him one day, but yeah, like it's just nonsense. It is utter
Mhm.
nonsense, like absolutely. Because if there was a final achievement, someone would have done it already.
Mhm.
Like
Yes.
and I'm reminded of I think it's the story of Jim Carrey, and he goes to, I can't remember. I think it's like Warren Buffett's birthday party, And Jim Carrey goes into the house, and it's a very sort of very high end sort of place, as you can imagine. And I think Buffett turns to him and says, like, "Hey, isn't this really cool? And look, we have this, and we have this, and we have this, and we have this, and we have this." And Jim Carrey says, "Yes, but I have the one thing that you will never have." And he says, "What?" And he says, "Enough."
Mm,
And
mm,
think, and I think, and like, that's the thing, like, with Goggins and people like that, that'd be the question I'd be asking him if I ever got a chance to work with it. I'd be saying, okay, will you just tell me when you've run far enough?
mhm,
And the fact that you can't find that sort of finish line, like, don't you think that shows you something? So it's quite clear in my view, it's quite clear that that journey is born. Like, if you read his story, he's obviously traumatized, obviously.
mhm. Yeah,
You know,
100%. Yeah.
obviously, like, and you can hear it in, like, you can hear it in his language, you can see it in his
Mhm.
body, you can see it how he holds back tears while he talks about his story, and he goes, but I just gotta get back out there and stay hard, and I'm like, no, you don't. Like, so, like, it feeds in some way, when leaders go, I love that shit. It's like, well, no, try it for 40 years, like, because it'll grind you down. And like, normally the thing that actually pivots people in leadership positions is normally one of two things, like, where they actually start to pay attention to this conversation that we're having. There's normally one or two things. Number one is like a health crisis. So, like, their body gives out in some way.
Mhm.
That's number one. Or number two is they get divorced. That's no normally number 2, is like the family, the trauma that they're in, like, plays out on their family too hard, and they end up losing their wife and kids, or husband and kids, through in the process. And normally that shatters, because it shatters the whole, well, it pulls the rug out of their whole journey, basically.
Mhm.
And, yeah, absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Like, and I've also had it the other way. Like, there's a client that comes to mind. Obviously, I won't say his name, but this client who comes to mind as well, who had the health crisis, but his wife said, like, "You need to get back out there and keep working." And he said, like,
Mm.
I can't, and they sort of separated, and I met him on the other side of that separation, so,
Wow.
I've had it happen. I've sort of seen it go that way too, but because obviously her self-worth was very tied up in the lifestyle that they had built for themselves.
Mhm.
She had her own sort of pain points that she hadn't integrated, and he said, like, "Just, I can't. I'm done." And that obviously led to them, and that led to them sort of separating. So it's normally those two things. It's normally like either their body gives out or their family falls apart. And normally what happens,
Mhm.
they then come to me and go, "God, Max, can you please help me?" That's the pattern that I notice the most.
Yeah, that's that and it's this, like, for me, it's this, I'm not good enough over and over again, and I had to force myself into not only just to face the fears, but, like, face the fears in a practical way. Like, I never could feel that I could go into a Louis Vuitton store, or a Chanel store. I would feel shitty if I walked in there. Even if I got to the point to where I could actually buy something in there, I never could go. It was just, I would walk in there and I would instantly feel, like I wasn't good enough. Like, it would really bring it out there. Or I'd be sitting in a boardroom and there would be 5 other people that were more successful. And I'm like, I'm here to learn from them. I'm here to learn from them. And then next thing you know, introvert Jason gets in my shell, doesn't want to say anything or ask them any questions or don't want to talk to them because of that. How do we dismantle illusions? I know you talk about this. I want to get into, like, people sometimes they'll have these self-imposed illusions that they have,
Yeah, yeah.
and then they're like, and you talked about it, they'll have a lie that they tell themselves. And I think a lot of times, go ahead.
Yeah, it's more that, like, the biggest problem with human epistemology, and by epistemology I just mean, like, our theories of knowledge, how we make sense of the world, is self-deception, right? Like, so, no, let's just start there. So what I mean by that is, you were talking about how, I think one of the questions that was showing up here was around, like, most leaders believe that they are self-aware, but they're actually not, and so,
Yes. All right. Right.
right, right. So this might be a good segue for us to answer that as well. Is, like, when we look out at the world, right, and even people who are not quote unquote self-aware, can see this, right? So you can practice this. You can, if your listeners are doing this, like, you can practice this right now, right? So when you look out at the world, it's very easy to see. Would it be fair to say that it's very easy to see that people in life are their own worst problem? So
Mhm.
when you look colleagues, or your colleagues, or people in government, or celebrities, or just anybody, you just look out at the world. It's like, it's very easy to see, like, you are your own worst problem.
Mhm.
It's not like the economy, or whatever. It's like, you are your own worst problem. And most leaders would go like, "Yeah, yeah, no, no, I can definitely see that." And I'd say, okay, now let's just look at your team, right? So the team of people that your ELT or executive leadership team, or whoever's working for you, Can you see that every member on your board, basically they are their own worst problem, right?
Mhm.
Maybe to a lesser degree, but you can still see that they're getting in their own way in some way. And they'd say, oh, yeah, 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 no, definitely, definitely. And then I would say, right. And now let's look even closer. Let's look at your family. So look at your wife, look at your husband, look at your kids, whoever. Or your parents, can you see that they are their own worst problem? And that they are self-deceived in some way. And the leader will go, oh, yeah, no, 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 definitely. And I'd say, right, but not you. And I'd say, like, how'd you get so lucky? Like when you look out throughout human history and all the batshit crazy shit we've done to each other and to our animals and to our planet and whatever, it's like you can see that people are obviously self-deceived, like in some,
Mhm.
right? So it's like billions of people, but not you. It's like, how did you get so lucky? How are you the only person that is transparent to themselves? So the thing is, just notice that when I look out at the world, right? When I look out at the world, it doesn't look like I am my own worst problem from my first person perspective, from a first person position. It looks like the world is my problem. Like I have these challenges within my business. I have these challenges in my marriage. I have these challenges in whatever. Like the problem is external to me, right? Like in some way, right? So it's like anyway, you get the idea. So notice, like from a second person position, right? When I look out at the world and I look at other people, it's easy for me to see that they are their own worst problem. So,
Mhm.
but notice that they themselves can't see that too. So, like when I look out at the world and I say, like, it's pretty clear that you're your own worst problem, Jace, and it's also
Mhm.
pretty clear that you can't see that. You think that the problem is the world. Notice that I'm in the exact same position. Like when I look at the
Mhm.
world, I don't think it's me. I think it's the world. So like let's just start there. So that should hopefully get us curious about, okay, well, what is it about me that I can't see? Right. So like that's a good place for, in the interest of self-awareness. That's a very good place for us to start. The second thing around like illusions, reason I talk about illusions a lot is like an illusion is something that appears one way, but actually is another way. So
Mhm.
so so but let's take the was it Louis Vuitton you were talking about before?
Mhm.
So okay, all right. So let's take Louis Vuitton, for example, right? The thing when you go into Louis Vuitton, right, and you make a purchase, right? You are not this is like try and catch this with me. Like let's say you buy a scarf, right? You buy a Louis Vuitton
Mhm.
scarf. You are not buying that scarf. What you are actually buying is what owning that scarf says about you.
Mhm.
That's actually the thing that you're buying. You're not buying fabric. You don't go into Louis Vuitton because the fabric is better. You go into Louis Vuitton because if I own that scarf, owning it
Mhm.
says something about
Mhm.
me, right?
Mhm.
So if we go back to like again, like if we go back to our history and we look at how like trade was done. So trade, by and large, most of human history was on the basis of utility. You had some sheepskin, I had some eggs. You need eggs, and I need sheepskin. Case, why don't we swap? Like that's how trade was done. Then we had the Industrial Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution basically provided us with a surplus of goods. So we had more goods than we knew what to do with. So that then opened up an interesting dynamic, which was the question of how do we convince people to buy more of than what they actually need? And so then came the rise of advertising, and and the purchasing of goods was no longer about utility; it was about identity. So it was
Mhm.
about what owning something said about me for having it. So if you had one sheepskin and I had two, right? That now said something about me, the fact that I had two, right? I only need one, like you. But me having another one says something about me. It says something about my status. It says something about, it like identity has become commodified. So
Mhm.
now let's fast forward, right? So now let's fast forward. And this is why I talk about it being a trap and an illusion, is because now you've got the not Gucci, now you've got the Louis Vuitton scarf, right? So now you can go around town and owning that scarf now says something about you for owning it. So it's the latest scarf, it's this year's line, whatever, and people associate you with that scarf. And that by definition, that must mean that they associate you, Jace, with elegance, with sophistication, with success. Follow me so far.
Mhm.
So but here's the trap, because when next year's scarf is released and you have now last year's scarf, that same scarf now no longer says elegance, sophistication, and success. Now it says you're falling behind. So
Right,
if I
right.
so
Yep.
if I have this year's and you have last year's, that now says something about me, and it also says something about you, the fact that you have last year's.
Mhm.
And yet the scarf is the same.
Yep.
It's the same scarf that you bought. So you not
Mhm.
buy so we don't actually make purchases of items. We make purchases of what owning said item means about me. And this is why it's an illusion. because that game you can never win, because the story in this case of elegance, sophistication, and success is not stuck to that item. It jumps from item to item. And so
Mhm.
you're stuck in this game of always buying the next thing because you are chasing a story. You are not chasing an item. And by definition, it is then illusory.
Yeah, no, that makes 100% sense there. I want to get into before our time is up. This has been so amazing. I want to get into Max with imposter syndrome, and you talked about health or divorce, and those are symptoms. I think a lot of time of high performers. How do you like if somebody, let's say you have a client, an imaginary client, and they're listening to this podcast and they're fixing to go through a divorce. They've earned their $5 million and now it's gone to the point. But is there a way that they can fix it without losing their edge or without just giving everything up? What do you suggest to them on that?
Yeah. So, okay. So, great question. Really good question, man. So, this is the thing about the human psyche is it's very, very clever at defending itself. So what I mean by that is this. You have to understand like your mind is like a thermostat in that it has like
Mhm.
a fixed point that it likes to return to because it's worked out that this point has kept us alive so far. So it's interested in your survival, right? So when we introduce change to that system in any way, invariably it will kick back. So like drug rehabilitation is like a wonderful example of this. Like I've seen this happen with my dad a bunch of times. Is like even if you introduce positive change to that system, the system will still kick back. And this is why I say,
Mhm.
well, it takes 66 days to set a habit. That's actually not true. What it means is it takes 66 days for that homeostatic point to adjust, to work out, to basically work out that we're going to survive. This is going to be all right. This change that we have introduced to this system, by system, I mean the mind and the body, is we're going to be all right. It's not going to endanger our survival. Right. So that's why like sticking to habits is really hard. The whole new year, new me thing is nonsense. All that sort of stuff. Like it invariably collapses. Right. So why is this important? Because when we are trying to introduce change to that system, it will be very clever about how it defends itself. So for example, right? If I'm working like there's a client of mine who comes to mind who's he's an executive, right? He's an executive, very competent guy, but is highly anxious and has low self-esteem, right? Like this is something no one would know this. It's something that he's obviously confessed to me in the work together, right? And I've said to him, mate, have you noticed that whenever something bad goes on in your life, you believe it's your fault, right? And yet whenever something good happens in your life, you think it's luck, right? And I said, and yet whenever something goes well in your life, you have an opportunity to change that story about you, whereby you can give yourself credit for something and thus improve your self esteem.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
you don't take it. You don't take it. But yet you're also sitting here telling me that this is something that you want to work on. But yet whenever you're given opportunities to work on it, you recoil. You don't take them. Right. And so this is the danger with our psyche is it's very clear.
This happens all the time with leaders, Max. This is so important. I want to stay on this because I even do this myself. It's like, okay, everybody's clapping, everybody's, whoa, this is awesome. And then I'm like, next, we can't
Right.
force,
Right.
we got to do this.
Right.
We got to move forward.
Right. Because if I'm happy, it could all fall apart. So,
Yeah.
so we can't have that, so
Mhm.
right. The psyche is very, very clever. This is what I mean around self-deception. It's very clever about how it gets out of stuff. So, for example, if I'm working with a leader and I go, well, why don't you forgive the people who have hurt you in the past or whatever, etc. And they'll say, yeah, but if I do that, I'll lose my edge, man. And I go, yeah, but that's not even you talking. Like, that's not even you speaking. That's your psyche very, very cleverly, like throwing up a red herring here like that basically works out a way of defending itself. Because the real belief that you have, right, is like if you were happy, right? If you were happy and if you allowed life to be good, it'd all crumble around you. Like that's your fear. That's your fear. So you won't
Mhm.
allow yourself to feel happy because if you are happy, that's the recipe for because well, I mean, Max, I mean, if I'm happy, then how come I would work at all? And I go like, well, but again, we go back to these assumptions that we build our journeys on. I'm like, that's a terrible place to sort of build a journey upon, you know? Um, so by way of fixing that, I would just say self-awareness, be smarter than that. You got to be wiser than that. You're a leader and you think you're so smart, like like outsmart those defense mechanisms of your own psyche. It's like, really? Like, do you really think that? Like, and this is the thing, like around self-reflection, is we don't self-reflect really deeply. It's like, okay, have you gone through periods in your life where you have had moments of happiness right? You've had moments of happiness, or you've had moments where you haven't felt like an imposter or whatever, right? In the past decade, yes or no? Right? Has that happened? And they'll go, yeah. I mean, not for long, but yeah, I have. I've had.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, did things fall apart? Yes or no? And they go, well, no. And I go, okay, so let's just start there. So you're afraid that if those moments extend, if those moments extend, then all of a sudden it will fall apart. Like, this is what I mean. Like, we don't self-reflect very deeply. We just sort of like, our mind throws things up and we go, oh, well, that must be true. But we don't actually investigate them.
That's a yeah, that Max, that's so brilliant. That I want to ask the last question because we're over the hour here. And I want to be respectful of your time, but you're on call for some of the world's top minds. What's the toughest question? Kind of reverse the script here. What's the toughest question they've ever asked you, and how did it change the way that you coach?
I don't know if there's a particular question that they ask me. I think one of the hardest things, the toughest thing that I've learnt in coaching is that I am very privileged and honored to join them on their journey, not the other way around.
Mhm.
So
Mm.
I'm very sensitive to, and I wrestle with often, because the important thing is not whether I know the answers. The important thing is whether they know the answers, and the important thing is that, most importantly, that they discover those answers in their own life.
Mhm.
So, for example, like if you look at the etymology of the word like learning, like the
Mhm.
etymology of the word learning is to follow a track. So, as in, like, if they can actually track their own experience, then they are learning, right? The idea around, like, if I know the answer, right, and they don't, and I give them said answer, but they haven't tracked it, they haven't learnt anything. And so, as an example, there's a client who comes to mind at the moment, and one of the things that I'm working on with him is to put together his ideal week. So, what does an ideal week look like? Like, put it in a calendar, and let's take a look. Because one of the things that always winds me up about coaching is they say, "What's the vision for your life?" But a vision is, in my view, is a very abstract, ethereal, sort of.
Mhm.
Whereas if I say, "Tell me what like a cracking week would look like for you," that we can actually aim at, because then we look at obviously the difference between what that week looks like versus your current week. How can we start moving things in the right direction, etc. Right? And it's taken him 5 weeks to get this to me. So he's got this like block around doing it. Right? That's sort of showing up for him. It's like, it's either that he's got a lot of energy invested in the way things currently are. He's afraid of facing something if he sees it, in terms of by way of
Mhm.
way that is, whatever, right? Like, whatever. And one of the things that I have needed to get better at is being okay with that. Because there's something in me that's like, could you just fucking do it, mate? Like, it's gonna be good for you. Like, it's gonna be good for you. I promise. Like, I promise you it'll work, Like, but the important thing is, like, part of his journey in this case, part of his journey is actually getting stuck on this.
Mhm.
That's
Mm. Yes.
that is valuable for him, right? And so on the other side, the next time he runs into something, I'll be like, remember how this happened last time and we were here and whatever. And if I like fucking hurry him up through this process, he misses these things. Like, he doesn't get these insights, and he doesn't get the learning. In other words, he doesn't follow, like, he doesn't track his own experience. Because and this is the thing, if he's joining me on my journey, and now that he's working with me, I'll take you to the fucking stratosphere or whatever. Like, if that's, again, goes back to like dynamics within the coaching industry. Like, in my view, that's wrong. Like,
Mhm.
I am privileged to join him on his journey, and
Mhm.
I walk side by side with him at his pace. Not,
Mm.
not,
Mhm.
not actually not. It's not the other way where he joins me and I then get him to move faster. I can help him renegotiate with himself around
Mhm.
around what success looks like and what steps he wants to take, etc. But it's leadership. Leadership, in my view, is not miles away from parenting, whereby like with our kids, it's like sometimes in my view, like, we have to let our kids fail. It's like,
Mhm.
this won't work, but he or she really wants to do it, and so you got to let him. I see. Yeah, I got to let him do it. And I got to let him see what happens, and like, and walk with him through that experience, etc. So,
Mhm.
by way of the things that's changed my coaching, that's been a big shift for me. Yeah.
Yeah, Jocko Willing talks about this as far as letting people fail like this so that they take ownership. Like he would never take ownership if you push him through. He'll do the work, but he won't actually take ownership. Like you said, it's his journey, and I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'll just read you this. Like, I think you'd like this. So he texted me literally last night, and I'll read this out to you. A few gifts that came from this pain in the ass plan that you've insisted that I do. One is that we don't think big enough as a family. Thank you for being you, fuck, I've shed a few tears tonight, and it's time that I promise you that it's time.
Mm,
And he texted me that last night. And it's like, if he hadn't
that's
gotten
so good.
stuck, if he hadn't gotten stuck there, if he hadn't gotten
Mhm.
stuck there, like, he wouldn't have had that insight.
Yeah. Well, that's something that's gonna stick too. Like, allowing him to be able to go through that process made it stick.
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah, and then you it got an emotional attachment to it and everything else. So, so that's amazing. Well, Max, this hour flew by super fast. And I know that you've got the book that's coming out, and I encourage everybody to, all our listeners to click the link and pre-order it. What are other things that you have going on? What's your website? How can
Yeah.
people get involved with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is maxstevenscoaching.com, right? Stevens is spelled with a PH, so maxstevenscoaching.com, right? I've written over 100 research articles on that website about human behavior. Most welcome to go and check those out and read them for yourself. If your listeners are feeling called to, they are most welcome to book in for a call. Like with me, it doesn't cost you anything, and I'm more than happy to walk through some solutions that will work for them. And that's about it, man. Like, I really, really enjoyed the conversation as well.
Yeah, it was awesome. So everybody, maxstevenscoaching.com, and then pre-order the book. Thank you, Max. I appreciate you.
Pleasure, man. Thanks for having me, Jace.